that we have established the overriding myth of Elias Ashmole, let's look at the reality. In a lecture entitled Elias Ashmole, Masonic Hero or Scheming Chancer, the author, historian, and expert on Freemasonry, Dr. Robert Lomas, decided to examine the historical evidence on Ashmole a little more closely, and found him decidedly wanting. In keeping with the moral ambiguity of the Magus figure, the warts and all details of Ashmole's rise to wealth and prominence are a lot less glamorous or noble than the Renaissance men like Basilio Ficino, which some of his biographers might want others to believe. Much like fellow Gemini, Donald Trump's ascent from Nepo baby to self-promoting property developer with a history of multiple bankruptcies to become the 45th and 47th President of the United States, Ashmole's story also begins with a fairly checkered history. His early life, certainly up until his Saturn return in August 1646, was marred by a series of early tragedies, unfortunate circumstances, and ill-fated choices, especially in terms of his political loyalties. However, unlike Trump, Ashmole's story also has a redemption arc. In typically gregarious Gemini fashion, Ashmole was a good networker and a fast learner. He was also a brilliant scholar and a loyal friend, care of his Jupiter in Aquarius and Moon in Taurus, which partially helps to explain his comeback from disgrace and ruin at the end of the Civil War to become a well-respected astrologer, man of letters, and patron of several esteemed and learned institutions. At any rate, he did not stay in Oxford long. After the town fell to the Roundheads, Ashmole moved on to Worcester in the winter of 1645, where he secured a similar position in the King's army as Master of Ordnance. Here he remained until the Royalist garrison fell too, at which point, out of a job and having formally signed articles of surrender to Cromwell's army, he was forced to retreat to Cheshire and move in with his father-in-law, both his biological parents having died. A parliamentary decree meant that he, along with other royalist supporters, were formally banned from returning to London, and so he could not practice law. The articles of surrender he had signed obliged him to either return to his home in Staffordshire or go overseas and never to bear arms any more against the Parliament of England or do anything wilfully to the prejudice of their affairs. This left him in a bit of a pickle. As Lomas puts it, Ashmole's luck appeared to have run out. He had picked the wrong side of the Civil War, and by late 1646 was out of a job and political favour. However, by late 1646, things do appear to have changed for Ashmole. By the 25th of October of that year, he was on his way to London, despite the undertaking he had given at Worcester not to live in the capital. So what had happened to reverse Ashmole's fortunes and make him socially acceptable once more? Perhaps it was his admission in mid-October 1646 to the Warrington Lodge of Light, a local branch of what is known as accepted Freemasonry, an informal precursor to the more formalized Masonic lodges that would later become established in England from around 1717 onwards. His diary entry for that date reads, 4:30 p.m. I was made a Freemason at Warrington in Lancashire with Colonel Henry Manwaring of Carrincham in Cheshire. Whatever the case, Ashmole appeared to get a new lease on life. According to Lomas, he stopped drifting and immediately moved back to London, a decision that would prove to be the making of him. This behaviour stands in stark contrast to his rather pitiful and desperate diary entries up until that point, which revealed that he had been afraid to contemplate such a move before his initiation. So what had changed? For any experienced astrologer, this description bears the unmistakable signature of a Saturn return, a well-known rite of passage that happens around the age of 28 to 29. This is a transformative life phase, often marked by a series of trials that lead to a leveling up. Through loss or adversity, the individual undergoes a spell of profound growth, ultimately emerging with greater maturity and more resilience. And indeed, if we look at his planetary transits for this period, we find that he has just had his Saturn return. Transiting Saturn returned to its exact location in August of that same year. However, what's even more remarkable is the transiting Pluto and Neptune, both planets associated with transformative and mystical experiences, are forming in opposition to each other across Ashmole's ascendant-descendant axis or natal horizon. From an astrological perspective, it is as if he has had a metaphorical death and then been reborn again via a peak experience or spiritual awakening of some kind, mimicking the symbolic death and resurrection rituals that underlie many mystery cults, including the rites of Freemasonry.